Hello, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of August 9th, 2025. Today has seen a huge number of very significant events, so let's get started. Naturally, all the developments of the past 24 hours revolve around statements made by the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, who announced that next Friday there will be a meeting between the US President, himself, and the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Everyone clearly understands that a meeting at such a high level primarily signals some kind of breakthrough in the negotiation process, an advance in the overall understanding of how the conflict in Ukraine should be resolved. Throughout the day, various insider reports, rumors, and gossip have been coming in from different countries: Poland, the United Kingdom, Germany, the US, Russia. Everyone is adding their own positions and whispers to the common pot, where all this information is simmering. Summing it all up, everything seems to point to the fact that according to the possible negotiation plan, let's say the plan for conflict settlement, Ukraine would have to withdraw its troops from the Luhansk region. That means, in practical terms, just a few areas. If we look at the Kupiansk axis, held by the Zaporizhzhia West group of forces, the main focus is on areas around Novoyahorivka, a small number of tree lines, forests, and the settlement of Nadia, just a small stretch of land. Also, territories around the settlement of Hrekivka, right up to the red line you can see on this map. That covers Luhansk. In addition, a small part of the Serebryanka forestry, just south of Dibrova and slightly north and northwest of Serebryanka, would also have to be abandoned by Ukrainian units if such an agreement were reached between the US and Russian presidents. And of course, the Donetsk region. This is the most important area where intense fighting is taking place. According to the same rumors, alleged protocols, and speculations, the Ukrainian side would also be forced to abandon the remaining parts of this region. When we talk about the Luhansk region, we're mostly speaking about fields, tree lines, swamps, and so on. But in Donetsk, we're talking about a distinct fortress. Western media now call it a citadel, or even a network of citadels. Any of these terms essentially describe the situation here. The Ukrainian side would have to surrender without a fight the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the town of Kostiantynivka, the Kostiantynivka agglomeration, Drushkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Siversk, and of course Lyman. We can see that Ukraine is not prepared for this. Just a week ago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that in principle, it was clear that Ukraine could no longer be restored to its 1991 borders by military means. Those were his words, spoken a week ago. But this morning, after all these rumors began circulating about possible negotiations and a potential plan between the Russian president and Trump, Zelensky stated that Ukraine would make no territorial concessions. This is clearly written in the constitution, which prohibits altering Ukraine's borders. So there's the dilemma. How this will be resolved is hard to say, but one thing is clear: Putin and Trump have more or less aligned their positions. Today, all the remaining key players, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Ukraine, and again the US, represented by Vice President J.D. Vance, are flying to London, where Vance will apparently sit everyone down and explain exactly what is going to happen next Friday. It seems that today in London, after Vance leaves, there will be another meeting where final decisions will be made on Ukraine, whether to accept the Trump-Putin plan or start a new wave of escalation that would derail the whole negotiation process. What could that mean? It could be something as straightforward as another offensive attempt, perhaps in the Sumy sector, or maybe toward Bryansk. And as always, I'd like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. If you've watched my videos before and aren't subscribed yet, please do. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Now let's move to Ukraine and discuss the situation on the ground. This might be where the Ukrainian side intends to act in order to sabotage the talks, or at least show the West, the US, and Russia that it's too early to draw a line under the conflict. We'll start with the Bryansk direction. This is a possible axis where Ukraine could launch offensive actions next week to derail the negotiations. In fact, it wouldn't take an operation on the scale of the one in the Sudzha sector. Just taking 3 to 5 villages in Bryansk region, planting flags and making their presence known would be enough to disrupt the process. No one would know what territory Zelensky might then demand in return, and of course the Russian side wouldn't agree to that. Until Ukrainian forces are pushed out of Bryansk region, Russia wouldn't return to the table. Today, in the small village of Maneva, Ukrainian saboteurs were spotted. About 15 men, according to some sources. Was this a reconnaissance in force? Just localized activity along the border? Hard to say. It might also be preparation for combat operations that could start only after the London meeting. Moving to the Sumy sector, another possible counter-offensive direction for the Ukrainian armed forces. Today, a new batch of footage was released showing Russian airstrikes on Ukrainian positions south of Alexeyevka, south of Vorochina, and south of Yablonka, specifically in the forested area where Ukraine is now concentrating its forces. It's likely that next week, Ukrainian forces will try to break the Russian defense line here, striking between Alexeyevka, Yablonka, and further north toward Novomikhailivka and Vorochina. If successful, this would allow them to split Russian defenses and then deal with each section separately. The likelihood of such moves will depend heavily on how today's second round of talks in London ends. The first part will have Vance delivering Trump's message, "Support this plan and we end the war," and the second, behind closed doors, will decide whether to escalate and try to derail the process. On the Kupiansk front, no changes in the north. Russian forces maintain the siege of Kupiansk without expanding positions. Likely there's regrouping and preparation for future moves. The Sever North Group reports daily on Volchansk, noting that Russia is steadily expanding its presence on the eastern bank of the Volcha River. No maps reflect this yet, but Russian troops may already be in the southeast of Volchansk. Fighting also continues near Sinelnikov, with Russian forces advancing 300–500 meters daily in a large forested area. On the Lyman front, Russian forces have again advanced toward Lyman and Kolodyazy, and most notably toward Chandriholov. Today the map changed significantly. Geolocated evidence from Ukraine shows Russian forces reaching farms within the settlement itself. It's unclear whether these are small recon units or the start of full assaults, but it's a troubling sign for Ukraine. Combat has effectively begun for Chandriholov, one of the last strongpoints before Lyman. Ukrainian authorities have reportedly decided to evacuate the entire Lyman community, 19 villages in total. This means the area is preparing for battle, with Russia now very close. Yesterday, Russian troops even entered Zarechne and took positions on its western outskirts. Some cartographers say Russia has almost fully cleared Serednie and is completing operations north of the Netrius River, covering Chandriholov, Serednie, and Karpivka. A breakthrough here could see Russian forces push west toward Oskil, possibly Izium, or Oleksandrivka. Now to the Siversk direction, just look at the map, its layout, and the number of geolocations. Compared to Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka, the southern Donetsk sector, and Zaporizhzhia, Siversk has 2 or 3 times more reported activity in the past day than any other front. The intensity here is very high, especially in the southeastern part of the settlement. It appears that Russian units are planning to assault the town of Siversk itself, or at the very least to storm and seize at this stage a company strongpoint located to the southeast. A rather large fortified position covering several square kilometers spread out to the south of the town. Possibly after securing this strongpoint, the Russian army intends to advance on the town proper. This is exactly the area from which the largest number of geolocations are coming in. Strikes are being carried out by drones, hitting Ukrainian armed forces positions and observation posts. In other words, there is a fairly intense artillery bombardment underway, although apparently it is still too early to call this a full-scale artillery preparation. When such preparation does begin, it will be obvious. Siversk is being readied for an assault, but at the moment it is still in the stage of heavy fire barrages. Next, we move on to the Kostiantynivka section of the front. There is a lot of interesting news from here. Let's start with the fact that today the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, in its latest report, stated that the center group of forces, as a result of fighting, managed to take full control of the settlement called Yablonka. Based on that report, we can update the map. Let's compare the maps for clarity. Just yesterday the situation looked like this. Most of Yablonka was already under Russian army control, with a few grey zones, especially in the northwest, and territory under Ukrainian control in the northeast part of the village. Today, all areas are now fully marked in favor of the Russian army. In effect, Russian units no longer face serious obstacles on their way toward the southwestern part of Kostiantynivka. It seems likely that something will also begin here in the near future. On the eastern flank, from the southeast direction near the Kleban-Byk reservoir, there is also a lot of news. Pro-Ukrainian mapmakers are far behind the actual situation on the ground, still marking such settlements as Romanivka or nearby areas as Ukrainian-held. Pro-Russian, neutral and pro-Western mapmakers have already marked settlements like Katarinivka and Sherbinivka as fully under Russian control. At the moment, according to objective control footage and the assessment of several reliable sources and experts, the Ukrainian army controls only one settlement, Kleban-Byk. Moreover, it's not even really control anymore, but rather an attempt to hold the settlement, while small Ukrainian groups try to withdraw through the Kleban-Byk reservoir. Let's take a closer look at updates from the last 4 days to get a clearer picture of what's happening in this area. We can see where Russian army strikes are concentrated. In one video, 3 Ukrainian infantrymen on August 7th attempt to leave this area, moving from Kleban-Byk through the forest under Russian artillery, air and mortar fire. Other footage shows a similar scene in the forest strip along the reservoir, with strikes using multiple launch rocket systems. This is one of only 2 possible evacuation corridors, both only passable by small groups of 2 or 3 people. This is what was happening on August 6th and 7th, 2025. Later, the Ukrainian side changed its route, now trying to evacuate slightly farther north on the opposite bank. But this area is even more open and even better covered by Russian fire. In more footage, which we won't watch to the end, another pair of Ukrainian soldiers tries to move north from Kleban-Byk toward Kostiantynivka, only to come under mortar fire. Farther north, other footage shows 3 Ukrainian troops attempting to break through their own dragon's teeth obstacles and barbed wire to escape the Kleban-Byk pocket, only to come under mortar fire and FPV drone strikes. So this is essentially a pocket, though it's hard to say exactly how many Ukrainian troops are trapped there. There are some escape routes, as we've discussed in recent videos, but based on all 4 clips we've seen, the conclusion is the same. However many Ukrainian soldiers try to use these evacuation routes, nearly all of them, likely with 90–95% probability, if not 100%, end up either killed or wounded. In other words, it's now effectively impossible to get out. The Ukrainian side is no longer attempting any counterattacks to break the encirclement or regain control, apparently understanding clearly that the moment for such counterattacks has long passed. This suggests that in the coming days or week, possibly before negotiations with Donald Trump, the Russian army will fully align the front line along the current red-marked line. That would mean a direct assault on Kostiantynivka, possibly from 4 or even 5 directions. On the southern Donetsk front, the Russian army continues assault operations against various small villages. Today, pro-Ukrainian mapmakers updated their maps accordingly, marking as lost all the settlements the Russian army had cleared weeks ago, according to objective control footage and Russian Ministry of Defense reports. There have been no further advances deeper into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, an important detail. As I mentioned earlier, according to possible agreements between Trump and Putin, the Ukrainian side may have to withdraw forces from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Therefore, the Russian army may see no sense in pushing deeper into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, since these areas might also have to be given back to Ukraine if such agreements are reached. On the Zaporizhzhia front, active fighting continues along the Kamyanske-Stepnohirsk line. Here, it's important to understand the context of the negotiations. We are not talking about a peace agreement, but about a ceasefire. This is a critical distinction. Peace and ceasefire are fundamentally different. A ceasefire can be broken unilaterally at any moment, though of course in such intense fighting, it's not as simple as flipping a switch. A peace agreement, however, does not allow either side to simply resume fighting without consequences, as breaking it would trigger sanctions and political backlash from almost every country in the world. Naturally, everyone understands that a ceasefire could be broken after 6 months or so. Therefore, next week, both sides are likely to be as active as possible to improve their positions before the ceasefire takes effect. In Zaporizhzhia, the Russian army will naturally aim to get as close to the city of Zaporizhzhia as possible and consolidate there. Today, however, the Ukrainian side launched counterattacks. According to certain mapmakers, experts, and geolocated footage, Ukrainian forces managed to counterattack and regain a foothold in the northern part of Kamyansk. Right now, the area is a patchwork. In some positions near Stepnohirsk, Russian troops are present. Farther south, on the northern outskirts of Kamyansk, Ukrainian units are in control. This is a fierce, head-on battle aimed at improving positions before a possible ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, which could come as soon as next week. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.